What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from UFC London from a betting perspective. Hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash. And if you'd like to watch breakdown videos for all the other fights on the card, all of the prelim matchups, head on over to my website mmabettingtips.com. There's a link for that in the description below. On there you'll find breakdown videos for every single fight on every single UFC card, as well as a VIP chat room where you can communicate with me on a daily basis, and also a wide range of bets. Pretty much all of them are profitable, everything from prop bets to over-unders, traditional pre-fight bets, all that kind of stuff. Check it out, I think you're going to like it a lot. So we're going to be taking a very deep dive into each of these main card fights from a gambling perspective, and always remember we're looking at these fights from a gambling perspective, not necessarily who's most likely to win, and I'll do my best to explain that concept as we go through. And as ever, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not telling you what to do. It's very important that you do your own research before placing any bets, and please, 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 please remember to gamble responsibly. Having said that, I have been making money betting on MMA for a very long time. I do make a living doing this, and all of the research, all the information I'm going to be sharing with you in this video comes from a lot of hard work, a lot of experience, a lot of research, and I kind of know what I'm doing. So take this advice on board, do your own research, gamble responsibly. Let's get into it. So we're gonna do something a little bit different in this video this week, because this is obviously a very different event. Well, it's not a very different event in the 25-year history of the UFC, but in the moment it is a very big event, because obviously it's the first UFC event outside of either Fight Island or the United States since COVID hit. So it is a big moment for the UFC. It's kind of like the first big step towards getting the UFC's international schedule rolling again. And so there are certain factors in play at UFC London that used to be a very big part of betting on MMA, but something that we haven't really had to talk about in a very long time, since most of the cards have been in the Apex Center, or at worst a similar facility on Fight Island. So what I thought I would do, instead of repeating myself lots of times throughout this video where I talk about how the impact of this event being in London could have on each of these fights, rather than kind of repeating myself, I thought I'll get it out the way at the beginning, and then you can use what I'm about to say in this segment of the video to apply it to every single fight on this card. So with UFC London, home advantage is going to be absolutely massive for British fighters. I've been to a few British events myself, and it doesn't matter if the fighters are from Wales, Scotland, England, doesn't matter. The fans in the O2 Arena on Saturday night are really, really going to get behind British fighters. So Paul Craig, Jack Shaw, they're going to get the same love that the English fighters are going to get on Saturday night. And if you're not from Europe, if you're from Europe, this will make total sense to you. But if you're not from Europe, I think it can be quite difficult for you to understand how tribal and how passionate European fans are for their own fighters, their own people. Football's the biggest sport in the world. Is very tribal, is very passionate, to the point where it often spills over into violence, right? We take sports very, very seriously. And it's all about that tribal mentality of really getting behind, people that represent your nation or your town or your city. And so it is a very different thing fighting in London compared to somewhere like Vegas. And it can have a big impact on how fights play out for lots of reasons. So this is huge right off the bat, because if you're a British fighter that is used to fighting, on a UFC card in the UK, or you're used to fighting on a big Cage Warriors card, that's going to give you a huge amount of experience, because you're going to know as soon as you step out in front of the crowd on Saturday night, you've got 22,000 people in the O2 Arena going absolutely crazy. Like, literally, it's so loud, the fucking arena shakes. Like, you can feel it in your chest. It's very hard to describe. The big fights in the O2 is pretty major, and that's going to give fighters that have experience of that, British fighters that have felt that atmosphere before, because they're going to know what to expect, right? It's not going to be totally comfortable for them. I'm not saying it won't have any impact on them, but when you know what to expect, you can deal with something a lot better, right? Fighters that have never fought in that environment before, it's impossible to prepare for. I heard Dan Hooker talk about how when he would fight in front of Australian fans in Australia on big UFC events, he expected to be similar to that. No, it isn't, Dan. So even experienced fighters like Dan Hooker are going to get a bit of a shock when they feel that tribal European passion on Saturday night. So this is huge, because obviously we're going on almost 3 years now since the pandemic hit, and as a result, a lot of newer, less experienced fighters may only have, experience fighting in the UFC in the comfort of the Apex Center, where it's basically like a TV studio, right? It's going to be sensory overload when they walk out on Saturday night. And especially if they're fighting against a British fighter, it's not going to be very friendly in there for them. It's going to be very hostile and very rowdy and very loud and very passionate. And that gives a big advantage to British fighters who are used to that and know what to expect. And, puts non-British fighters who haven't experienced that at a bit of a disadvantage, because they're walking into a bear pit on Saturday night and they may not realise how fucking ferocious those bears are going to be. So straight away, that's one aspect of how home advantage will help British fighters on Saturday night. Another aspect is how having 22,000 people behind you is very motivating. It's going to give you a lift. Now, there are some fighters who may buckle under the pressure and adrenaline dump, trying to live up to the crowd's expectations. And we'll be talking about individual examples of that as we go through each fight. But for fighters like Molly McCann or Paddy Pimblett, who have fought in front of sold-out crowds at the Echo Arena in Liverpool, they're going to absolutely thrive off this atmosphere on Saturday night. We've seen them thrive off it before. And so, fighters that really rise to the occasion and fight at their best when they've got the crowd behind them, it's going to be huge for them this weekend. And it's going to be very difficult for less experienced fighters to deal with that, because they're literally going to have home fans baying for blood, booing them, insulting them, really getting behind the home fighter pretty hard. So you guys know what it's like when you're working out, right? This is why people hire personal trainers, right? Why do people hire personal trainers? They don't hire personal trainers to tell them what to eat. They don't hire personal trainers to tell them what exercises to do. Any fucker can do that. That's what we've got Google for. People hire personal trainers for motivation, so that when you're getting tired and you want to stop, and if you went to the gym by yourself, you could easily stop. It's not as easy to stop when you've got a personal trainer, breathing down your neck, giving you praise, encouraging you, telling you can do it. Personal trainers, that's why people hire personal trainers, right? It's for motivation. And so it's like having 22,000 personal trainers in the cage with you on Saturday night if you're a British fighter, pushing you on every time you get tired, pushing you on every time you have a little bit of success, cheering you on every time you get put in a bad position. They're urging you to get out of that bad position. It's a huge advantage. And just, another one of the reasons why home advantage is big this weekend. Another reason why home advantage is big this weekend is, of course, the judges. It is a pretty well-known fact that British judges on British events are extremely biased towards British fighters. Now, that might not be due to incompetence. It might be due to bias and incompetence. It might be due to bias or incompetence or something else. We're going to talk about what that something else is. But whichever way you dress it up and whatever the reason is, it cannot be denied that it is very difficult to beat British fighters by decision in Britain. It just is. Not on like smaller regional shows, but on big UFC events for sure. We've seen so many sketchy decisions over the years in favour of British fighters on British events. Who could forget when Dan Henderson beat Michael Bisping pretty decisively in the main event of that, title fight in UFC Manchester. And obviously the judges scored the fight in favour of Bisping. That's just one example, but countless examples throughout history of British fighters coming out on top, thanks to a little help from the judges on events, big UFC events in the UK. So that's probably the best example I could think of, Dan Henderson losing to Michael Bisping, but there are many, many more. And if you don't remember that fight, go back and watch it to see how bad of a decision that was. Henderson won the fight pretty clear, in my opinion. I'm the biggest fucking Michael Bisping fan ever. Love the guy. But irrespective of what the reason for the judging, favoritism is, it's a factor. It is a big factor to take into consideration, because if fights are remotely close, it's going to be very difficult for a non-British fighter to beat a British fighter. In order for a non-British fighter to win rounds against a British fighter this weekend, they've really got to put it on him. They've really got to win the round beyond all reasonable doubt. Just edging them might not be enough. Dana says never leave it in the hands of the judges, and this weekend, never has that, never has that been more true, than this weekend. This weekend, never leave. You really don't want to leave it in the hands of the British judges this weekend. So what are the reasons for, it being very difficult to win decisions against British fighters in close fights in UFC events in the UK? Well, there are a few reasons. It could be judges' bias. It could be, like I say, incompetence. What I think is most likely the reason is judges are human beings, right? Judges are very human. They're like the rest of us. Our monkey brains are easily influenced. And if you haven't been to a UK UFC event, it's hard for me to portray how wild the atmosphere is. It won't come across over the TV. They dumb down the volume and stuff. You won't get it listening to the TV. You've got to be in there. And so if you're a judge watching a fight take place, and you're kind of watching it, and one guy is kind of edging the other, but then every time the other guy, the British guy, has any little bit of success, 22,000 people are going fucking wild. And then at the end of the round, you think the non-British guy's edged it, but the other dude is fucking pumped up. He's got his hands up in the air. The crowd's going wild for him. He's celebrating like he's won the round or won the fight. Your monkey brain is going to start to second guess what you saw and be like, oh, wait a minute. 22,000 people in here think that dude won. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this, British, maybe this other guy didn't do so well. Maybe the guy from the UK, did actually win that round. And so I don't necessarily think it's corruption or bias or incompetence or anything like that. I just think when you're in an arena and 22,000 people are really getting behind one guy, it's very difficult not to be influenced by that. And so home advantage is huge this weekend. If you're thinking of betting any fighters who aren't from the UK, I would make sure that you believe that person can either win the fight inside the distance, so judging doesn't come into it, or you think they can win the fight very dominantly to the point where there's no way the judges could kind of screw it up. So what's also interesting about this week is we're seeing a lot of odds movement reflect the fact that it is going to be difficult for non-British fighters to beat British fighters this weekend. It's going to be difficult. If we look top to bottom, you can see from the odds movement, lots of red arrows on Aspinall's odds. His odds have been declining. Arnold Allen's odds, lots of red arrows. His odds have been declining. Paddy, lots of red arrows. His odds are declining. Molly McCann, lots of red arrows. Her odds are declining. Jay Herbert, no. But Mike Grundy, lots of red arrows. His odds are declining. Same goes for Jack Shaw, lots of red arrows. Corey McKenna, lots of red arrows. And not so much with Mokaev, but he's already a pretty big favourite. So aside from Mokaev, Jay Herbert, and who was the other one? Paul Craig. So apart from those three, every British fighter is seeing their odds decline this weekend. Now, one part of that could be that the UK is one of the biggest gambling markets in the world. We absolutely love the gamble in the UK. You know, how many Premier League teams have got, you know, betting companies as their main shirt sponsor. Bet365 are by far the biggest online gambling company in the world. There is no competition. They are in a league of their own. So the UK is a very big gambling market. Most of the big online gambling businesses in the world are UK businesses. They may be based offshore for taxation purposes in locations like Malta or Gibraltar, but ultimately companies like Paddy, William Hill, Bet365, they're UK businesses. And so, you know, UK fans are clearly getting behind their own fighters with their money this weekend, and that's probably why the odds on all these British fighters are declining. But it is also probably the fact that, like we've said, it's going to be very difficult for non-British fighters to beat British fighters this weekend, because ultimately it's going to be hard to win decisions against these guys, and a lot of them are going to be bang up for it. They're really going to get a lift from the crowd. So that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of how home advantage is going to have an influence on many of the matchups this weekend, and you can apply what I've said to every single one of these fights that feature a British fighter this weekend. I will touch on aspects of what I've said throughout the rest of the video as we take a deep dive into each of these matchups, but I will try to just gloss over things a little bit because obviously I've just covered everything in a lot more detail. So we will kick things off in terms of the fight breakdowns by talking about the main event between Alexander Volkov and Tom Aspinall. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Aspinall is the favourite at average odds of about 1.77, which is minus 130 for an implied probability of 57%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Alexander Volkov, he is around about an average of 2.10, which is going to be plus 110 for an implied probability of 48%. So Alexander Volkov is 33 years old, 6'7" with an 81-inch reach, and Tom Aspinall's 28 years old, 6'5" with a 78-inch reach. So first of all, we've spoken a lot about home advantage at the beginning of this video, and if you just skipped to my breakdown for this fight, you kind of need to go back and watch that bit to understand how home advantage is likely to have an impact on this matchup. But to just touch on what I think the impact will be on Aspinall personally, we've got to consider that there are a lot of new things for Aspinall to deal with in this matchup. He hasn't come up through, you know, massive promotions like Cage Warriors, like Paddy and Molly have. He's not used to headlining big cards where people are paying money to come and see him in a main event. He's not going to be used to the support and the atmosphere and the pressure that comes with that of delivering for his fans on Saturday night. So I do think the atmosphere is a bit of a risk to Aspinall this weekend, because it's his first main event, it's his first 5-round fight, it's his first big fight in a big arena with a lot of fans watching. You look at Aspinall's fights over the last few years, they've all taken place since COVID hit, so they've all taken place in the comfort of the Apex Centre behind closed doors in a glorified TV studio. And so now, on Saturday night, he's going to be walking out in front of 22,000 people, screaming his name, going absolutely wild, going crazy every time he lands a punch. That can be a lot for a young guy like Aspinall to deal with, a very inexperienced guy with only 13 pro fights. So we don't know how the crowd is going to influence Aspinall's performance on Saturday night, but it could increase the probability that he will adrenaline dump. So if you're thinking of betting Aspinall that, you know, this weekend, that's something you definitely need to consider. The atmosphere is going to be crazy on Saturday night, there's no doubt about it, but I don't think it's going to have too much of an impact on Volkov. He's very experienced. This is not his first rodeo. He's fought all over the world against some of the best fighters in the world, and you know, I'm sure he's going to be able to adapt, adjust, and perform how he wants to perform just fine. So even though we've talked a lot about home advantage at the beginning of this video, I actually think it could have a negative effect on Aspinall here, because it is unlikely the fight goes to a decision. And I don't think he'll really have much of a negative effect on Volkov at all. So in terms of other X factors on this one, both these guys are definitely on opposite career trajectories. Aspinall's very inexperienced. He's an absolute baby at 28 years old for a heavyweight. He's only had 13 pro fights. And so he should be making big improvements from fight to fight. He's at the very beginning of his career in the UFC. And as a result, you know, he should be getting better and better from from fight to fight, right? He's going to be on that upward career trajectory. Volkov, on the other hand, is only 33 years old, which is very young for a heavyweight. 33 years old is not in any way, old for a heavyweight. But the difference with Volkov is that he has a lot of miles on the clock. So he has over 40 pro fights. And over those 40 pro fights, he's taken a lot of damage. He's been in a lot of wars. He's gone through a lot of decisions against a lot of tough guys. And so in terms of fight miles, Volkov may as well be 133. So with Volkov, we have started to see signs of his decline over the last few years. Over the last few years, he has put on more weight. He's become heavier. And as a result, he's become slower and his gas tank is now a lot worse than he used to be. Volkov built a career off being incredibly durable, incredibly tough, and being able to drag his opponents into deep waters and kind of put a pace on them that they couldn't keep up with. That's what he's built a career off. You know, a lot of guys in the heavyweight division tend to slow down a lot as fights wear on, and Volkov's real strength was that he didn't really slow that much, and even if he did, he was still somewhat effective. And that was his big strength. The longer the fights wore on, the more trouble he gave you. And Volkov's decline over the last couple of years is really bad for him because he's not one of these, heavyweights with big one-shot knockout power. He's not particularly fast. He's not a particularly good striker, not a particularly good grappler. It's nothing he does particularly well. It was kind of his toughness and pace that was his biggest strength. And now his gas tank's not as good and he can't fight as at such of a pace and he's not as fast. He's definitely not as difficult of an opponent as he used to be. Volkov is definitely on a decline. I don't know if that's fight miles, because obviously he's had an absolute ton of fights, throughout his career. And, you look at his career, Volkov is a guy that was straight off to the races from day one, competing in M1 Global from literally his first fight, which is obviously a pretty decent promotion. And then, signed the Bellator back in 2012. So for at least the last 10 years, Volkov has been competing against the best heavyweights in the world. And so, it's no surprise that the decline is coming, at an earlier age than it would for most other guys, because Volkov started his career at a high level a lot earlier than a lot of other guys, right? At just 21, 22, 23 years old, Volkov was competing against the best heavyweights in the world. Not many heavyweights can say that. So I don't know if Volkov's decline is down to that, or if it's down to him maybe losing a little bit of motivation and maybe coming to the realization after losing his fight against Cyril Gane that he would never be champion. A while back, I think a couple of years back, he moved from Russia to live and train full-time in California with his wife and kids. And maybe that's just a sign that he's starting to wind down a little bit and, maybe not train as hard as he used to back when he was in Russia. I don't know, but whatever's going on there, Volkov's definitely not the same guy that he used to be, which will make him an easier fight for Tom Aspinall this weekend, but not necessarily an easy fight. I think if Aspinall would have fought the Volkov that existed 3-4 years ago, I think Volkov would have destroyed Aspinall in this fight. But the Volkov that exists in 2022 is very beatable for Aspinall. So let's talk about how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view. Well, first of all, if we talk about grappling, we'll get grappling off the table because that is probably the quickest and easiest thing to discuss. So Aspinall's grappling is a bit of an unknown. If you look at his record, we can see that he's had 13 pro fights. This one's a boxing fight, so we won't count that one. But he's had 13 pro fights, and out of those 13 pro fights, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So out of his 13 pro fights, 10 of them have ended in round 1. and the rest have ended in round 2. Aspinall's never been the distance, and for this reason, you can see, his last, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 7 of his last 8 fights ended in less than 3 minutes. Most of them ended in less than 2 minutes, and the only fight that went past round 1 ended a minute into round 2. So we really haven't seen any of Aspinall's grappling in a very long time. So it's difficult to know what to expect from Aspinall's grappling on Saturday night. There is a lot of grappling in his fight against Stuart Austin, but that fight took place almost 7 years ago now. And, Aspinall's likely to have improved so much since then. It's very dangerous to form opinions based on how Aspinall looked back in 2015, because he's likely a lot better than that now. So, Aspinall's grappling is a total unknown, but using our knowledge and experience of the sport, we can make some educated guesses as to how Aspinall's grappling is most likely to be. So, I am a fan of British MMA. I want to see British fighters do well. I want to see Aspinall do well. But ultimately, I make my living betting on MMA, so I've got to be brutally honest with how I view the sport. And I like to form opinions based on most likely outcomes. So there will always be exceptions to the rule, but if you stick to most likely outcomes and you stick to trends, and you stick with betting with the trend as opposed to betting against the trend, you'll make your life a lot easier over the long run and put yourself in a much stronger position to be profitable in the long run. So we don't really know anything about Tom Aspinall's ground game. Some people will be like, oh, he looks amazing in his training videos. His dad is a fucking high-level BJJ coach. When we have seen flash of his grappling against Arlovsky and Baudo, he's done all right. Like, some people will be pretty complimentary towards Aspinall's ground game. But for me, the proof is in the pudding. And if I look at the trend that exists with Tom Aspinall, number one, we know that he's British. And the harsh reality is there aren't many good British grapplers out there. There aren't many good British MMA grapplers out there. There really aren't. Can you think of any really, really good British MMA grapplers? You might pop up and say, someone like, I don't know, Mike Grundy as an example. But, Mike Grundy was a wrestler before he started training MMA. I'm talking about MMA grapplers that came out of the UK, really, really good ones. There aren't any, and if you can name any, I can name you fucking 10 much better American or much better Brazilian or much better Russian grapplers for every one good British grappler you can name. Generally speaking, Britain produces strikers. And while you do get some British fighters with a base in grappling, they don't tend to be very good. Certainly not as good as, the likes of Russian, Brazilian, American grapplers. Just a harsh reality. So maybe Aspinall is an exception to that rule, and maybe Aspinall's grappling is amazing, but the trend tells us that's unlikely. On top of that, Aspinall trains out of Team Kaobon. That's his home base, right? That's where he's trained his whole career. And Team Kaobon have a long history of producing fighters that aren't very good on the ground. Again, it's a really harsh reality. It's just true. Team Kaobon fighters don't tend to be very good MMA grapplers. That's just the way it is. We saw how bad Darren Till looked against Derek Brunson. Again, people may say, what about Mike Grundy? But Mike Grundy was a wrestler before going to Team Kaobon. He wasn't a fighter that developed grappling skills at Team Kaobon. So, maybe Aspinall is a unicorn. Maybe he's an amazing grappler. Maybe he's the first top MMA grappler to ever come out of Team Kaobon. And maybe, he will be the exception to that rule. But if you bet against the exception to the rule, if you bet against trends, you will make life very difficult for yourself. Go with most likely outcomes, and the most likely outcome here is Aspinall's grappling probably isn't very good. Now, even though we don't know a lot about Aspinall's grappling, we do know a lot about Alexander Volkov's grappling, and what we know is that he's a very strange grappler. He is pretty easy to take down, very, very weak off his back, but he's pretty good at defending himself. And if he gets into top position, he's heavy, strong, really, really difficult to shake off and quite nasty from top position. So I could actually see Aspinall having success with his grappling early on if this fight were to go to the ground. But the problem with grappling in the heavyweight division is that it takes a lot of energy. And I think it will be a very dangerous tactic for Aspinall to try and use grappling early on, because while he will probably be able to get Volkov down and will probably be able to have a bit of success on the ground, that might come at a big cost, because he'll probably not be able to achieve very much on the ground because Volkov's very good at defending himself on the ground, and Aspinall really risks gassing himself out if he does that, because, you know, even though Volkov's gas tank's not what he used to be, he's still a tough Russian. They're still going to be scrappy and dangerous for the entire 25 minutes here. So in terms of grappling, I think Aspinall is likely to have the advantage on the ground early on, as long as he's not on the bottom. If Volkov gets on top of him, he's in a world of trouble. But Volkov very rarely tries to take guys down, so that's not, you know, it's not too realistic of an outcome anyway. But I think Aspinall will have the advantage on the ground while they're both fresh. But I think the longer the fight goes, Volkov can really start to cause this guy massive problems if he can put Aspinall on the ground and get on top of him. So obviously both these guys are primarily strikers, so you would expect a decent percentage of this fight to take place on the feet. And how this fight goes on the feet, it's going to completely come down to Aspinall's gas tank. That's it. That's what this comes down to. This entire fight will be decided by that. And so the problem with that is we don't know what Aspinall's gas tank is like, because again, in 10 out of his 13 pro fights, he's finished the fuckers he's fought in round 1. Which means we don't know how he's going to look into the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth round. We have no idea. But what we can do, again, is look at most likely outcomes to give us clues. We won't get a definitive answer, but making money in this game is all about making the best decision possible with the information we have available. And when there's huge gaps in information, you've got to look for clues to determine most likely outcomes. So I don't know what Tom Aspinall's gas tank is like, but there are a lot of clues to suggest it's not very good. Let me explain. Aspinall is a fighter that relies a lot on footwork and movement. One of the things that makes Aspinall so great is that he can fight like someone in a much lower weight class. He's lightning quick. He moves very well. He's very elusive. He's very agile. He's very good, and this is why he has so many first round finishes, because he's not like any other heavyweight, right? Well, he's a little bit like Cyril Gane, but Cyril Gane's not as dangerous as this guy. Cyril Gane doesn't have the one-shot knockout power that Aspinall has. Aspinall's a better boxer than Cyril Gane for sure. Cyril Gane's got a kick-based style of striking. But Cyril Gane is unique because Cyril Gane can fight effectively for 25 minutes. This is what makes Cyril Gane very, very, very impressive. This is what makes Cyril Gane a unicorn. Because Cyril Gane can fight for 25 minutes like no other heavyweight ever has been able to. Cyril Gane can stay light on his feet and use a lot of movement, a lot of feints to chip away at his opponents for 25 minutes without slowing down. Of course, he slowed down a bit against Ngannou, but that was because of all the grappling. In a kickboxing match, Gane's just as effective in round 5 as he is in round 1, and that is very unique. I can't think of any other fighter in the history of the heavyweight division, in any promotion, that can fight like Cyril Gane for as long as Cyril Gane can. Because all that bouncing around, all that movement, all those feints, all that footwork, they take a lot of energy, which big guys don't tend to have because they've got all that extra body weight to carry. So Aspinall obviously has a similar sort of style to Cyril Gane, where he's very effective and very dangerous because he moves like someone in the welterweight division. He's very light on his feet. He bounces around, lots of feints, lots of movement. But the problem with this style is it takes a lot of energy to fight like that for 25 minutes, even 15 minutes, even 10 minutes. It takes a superhuman gas tank, probably DNA genetical cardio, you know what I mean? You can't even train. I'm not saying Aspinall won't be able to train hard enough to develop a gas tank that's going to enable him to fight to his full potential for as long as he wants to, it might just not be biologically possible because he's so big. Big guys tend to get tired fast. That's just the way it is. It's a fact of life. It's fucking biology. So this is not a knock on Aspinall. I'm not saying he has a bad gas tank. I'm saying it's biology. He probably can't do anything about it. But Aspinall is in a situation where he has a style that requires a lot of energy and insane cardio to implement over a 25-minute period. And in the entire history of the heavyweight division, there's only been one guy that can fight like that for 15 to 25 minutes. His name is Cyril Gane. Now, is Tom Aspinall capable of being another unicorn? Could he be another unicorn? Could he be the second coming? Could he be the next generation of fighter that can fight like a welterweight in the heavyweight division for 25 minutes? He could be, but it's fucking unlikely. It's really, really, really unlikely. It's really unlikely. If you're an Aspinall fan, I don't want to piss on your chips. It's a UK expression. But it's unlikely. It's unlikely. What is the likelihood that we get two unicorns arrive at the same time? Gane and Aspinall. It's possible. Very fucking unlikely. Very unlikely. So the way that I would look at this is I would keep an open mind and assume it is possible that Aspinall can fight effectively for 5 rounds. But it's far more likely that he can't. Because everything comes from his footwork and movement. And as soon as his footwork and movement starts to get a little bit flatter, he's going to become a lot less effective. He's going to become much easier to hit, much slower, much more flat-footed, much worse defensively. And his record is very interesting because, like I say, 10 of his 13 career fights have ended in round 1. But if you look at his 2 losses, they are 2 of the 3 fights that have gone past round 1. Okay, so let me just break this down for you. Aspinall's had 13 pro fights. He's lost 2. Let me start again. Aspinall's had 13 pro fights. He's only lost 2 of them. He's 11-2. The 2 fights that he's lost are 2 of the only 3 fights that went past round 1. I'm all about the trends. The trend is your friend until the end of the trend. Shout out to Eric Crown. There's a little bit of a trend emerging there. That little trend is, if the fight goes past round 1, Aspinall probably will struggle a little bit. Now, it is inconclusive because these fights took place such a long time ago and Aspinall's likely to have improved so much since then that you really don't want to form strong opinions based on that because, you know, these fights were such a long time ago. But remember, making money in this game is all about making the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And you cannot deny that it is a bit of a coincidence that the 2 career losses for Aspinall are 2 of the 3 fights of his that have gone past round 1. Bit of a coincidence. On top of that, if you go back and watch the third fight that ended in round 2 against Andrei Arlovski, he did win it, but he wasn't looking good in the first minute of that round. If you go back and watch that fight, take a look at Aspinall's footwork and movement in round 1 and compare that to his footwork and movement in the first minute of round 2. Way flatter, way easier to hit, body language not good. The dude was slowing down, and I think if he hadn't got that quick finish early in round 2, that fight could have got a bit dicey for him. So, look, go do your own research, watch the fights, take a look, let me know what you think in the comments below on that. But I do think Aspinall's gas tank could be very, very sketchy. You know, we saw the same with Terence McKinney last week. These glass cannons that are amazing for 1 round, but you drag them into deep water and they find themselves in a lot of trouble. And of course, that's what Volkov is going to try and do. He's going to try and weather the early storm, drag Aspinall into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds where it could get dicey. Now, in Aspinall's defense, he did commit a lot of energy in round 1 against Arlovski, going for the finish, so I'm not surprised he looked tired at the beginning of round 2, but that could easily happen again against Volkov. Volkov's a tough guy, difficult to put away, and with the crazy atmosphere in the arena, the probability increases that, you know, Aspinall could adrenaline dump on on Saturday night. So, in terms of how these two guys match up on the feet, Aspinall is so much better than Volkov. It's unbelievable. He's faster, he's more accurate, he's more powerful, he moves better. If Aspinall can fight for 5 rounds like Volkov, if Aspinall can fight for 5 rounds like he can fight for 1 round, Volkov is screwed. Aspinall will dominate this fight. He will destroy Volkov. But the trend is your friend until the end of the trend. Shout out to Eric Crown. And the trend tells us, the information we've got available suggests if this fight goes past round 1, probably going to be very dicey for Volkov. So then we've got to look at, what is the probability that Aspinall could knock Volkov out in round 1? And if we again look at the information we've got available, I don't feel it's that likely. Because, number 1, Aspinall's a smart guy. He's going to know my first, 5 round, 25 minute fight. I don't want to risk coming out the gate super hard in round 1 and burning myself out. I need to pace myself. So you're likely to see a slower start from Aspinall, which is definitely what he needs to do to ensure that he doesn't gas out. But then it can also backfire because his best chance of winning this fight might be early. So I would expect a slower start from Aspinall than usual. But then on the other side of the coin, you've got to think about the guy he's facing, right? A tough, durable Russian. If we look at Volkov's record, since he came into the UFC, he's looked ridiculously difficult to put away. If we look at this, right? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and then he was knocked out by Minikov all the way back in 2013. So look at this, man. Alexander Volkov has only been knocked out 1 time in his last 20 pro fights by Derek Lewis, one of the scariest knockout artists in the history of the heavyweight division. And Volkov was winning that fight and got knocked out with 11 seconds left to go in the fight. Volkov was dominating Derek Lewis. So Volkov's only been knocked out 1 time in his last 20 pro fights. Could Aspinall be the second guy to do it in 21 pro fights? Of course he could. Of course he could. Aspinall's great. He's dangerous. But the trend is your friend until the end of the trend. What is the most likely outcome? If we know Volkov's a tough guy, difficult to put away, it's probably less likely he's going to be knocked out in this fight than he will be knocked out in this fight. It's just you want to stay on the side of the trend, right? Why are you betting against the trend? If you were to bet on Volkov to get knocked out in fucking 19 of his last 20 fights, you would have got fucking destroyed. So why would you do it this time? The trend is your friend until the end of the trend. So, when I look at this, to wrap everything up that I've just said, I think this is a really tough fight for Tom Aspinall. He may come out and start Volkov in round 1. There's no doubt about it. But if he doesn't, this one could get very dicey for him. So I'm not personally going to be betting this fight because I don't want to make an assumption on what Aspinall's gas tank is like. It's a huge gap in information. We can use trends to kind of anticipate what his gas tank's going to be like, but ultimately we don't know. We've just got a clue, right? We've got a clue, which I'll use for live betting. I've got a little bit of a clue there, right? I'm not going to be betting this fight myself and putting my money in too much danger if I go on either side here. But I do think it could be a very, very difficult fight for Tom Aspinall. All things considered, based on all the information I've shared with you and all my research, I do think this is clear dog or pass. If you want to bet this fight, you have to bet Volkov. I would even go as far as saying Aspinall is a bad bet. Because if you bet on Aspinall, it's exactly the same as all the guys betting on Terence McKinney last week. You are basically betting on a guy being able to get a finish in round 1 against a very tough, durable guy like Volkov. And we saw how that worked out for Terence McKinney last weekend when he fought a tough, durable guy like Drew Dober. So it's a very complex fight. I'm not going to be betting it. I like money too much. Like I say, I'm doing so well in my betting career at the moment. I'm betting bigger amounts than I ever have done before. I'm doing crazy good. Like, I never thought that I would be at a point in my life where I'm doing this good from betting. So when I'm betting on sports these days, it doesn't matter if it's football, MMA, I need to see something really special because I'm putting up huge amounts these days. So for that reason, I need there to be no big gaps in information in order for me to pull the trigger. I need to have a lot of confidence and conviction in my decision. Like last weekend when I placed my biggest bet of all time on an MMA fight, when I bet on JJ Aldrich to beat Gillian Robertson, right? I had a lot of conviction in that bet because we had the answer to pretty much all questions going into that fight, and it was a terrible fight for Gillian Robertson, and it was a great stylistic matchup for JJ Aldrich, right? There's too big a gap in information here for me to bet this fight, but if you really do want to bet it, you know, because you want to gamble, have a little bit of fun, has to be dog or pass. Please do not bet Aspinall. It's very likely he's a one-round fighter, and it ain't going to be easy to get Volkov out of there in one round. So I hope you found that breakdown video useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I've maybe committed treason. I've maybe gonna have the Queen lock me up for you know, being highly critical of a British fighter. I love Aspinall. I want him to be the heavyweight champion. I hope he does great, but you know, I make a living betting on MMA, and I've got to keep it real and use my experience and my research to give you most likely outcomes. I think most likely outcome is Volkov wins. Let's now talk about the next fight, the co-main event between Arnold Allen and Dan Hooker. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Arnold Allen is the favourite at average odds of about 1.83, which is minus 120 for an implied probability of 55%. And if we take a look at the odds on Dan Hooker, he is around an average of 2.0, which is going to be plus 100 for an implied probability of 50%. So 50, 50, 50. The odds are very tight here. Roughly the same odds on both guys. How do I see it playing out? So Arnold Allen's 28 years old, 5'8" with a 70-inch reach. Dan Hooker is 32 years old, 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. So straight away, that's the first X factor we've got to discuss. It's the size. Size matters in MMA. We have weight classes for a reason. And Dan Hooker is going to be a lot bigger than Arnold Allen on Saturday night. And he's also got a massive 5-inch reach advantage. This is pretty major in a fight like this because Dan Hooker knows how to use that reach advantage. Two of his best weapons are his leg kick and his jab, and he does a really good job of fighting long and using his length. So this size advantage is going to be very beneficial to Dan Hooker this weekend. However, it may also come at a cost because we know this is Dan Hooker's first fight back at featherweight in a long time. He's dropping from lightweight to featherweight. And so even though he's going to have a big size advantage over Arnold Allen, we know that when you go through a brutal weight cut, you shed a lot of weight, it can affect your speed, it can affect your durability. And so if Hooker looks at featherweight like he looked at lightweight, I think Hooker gives Arnold Allen absolute hell this weekend. But we don't really know what version of Hooker we're getting because we don't know how he's going to look at featherweight. He's an enormous lightweight. So the weight cut to featherweight is going to be absolutely brutal for him. And while he did start his career in the UFC as a featherweight, we can see that he had a few fights at a featherweight when he first came into the UFC. An important detail to pay attention to is that it gets a lot harder to make weight as you get older. So, you know, back in 2014 when Hooker was fighting in the featherweight division, you know, he only would have been in his early 20s. It's going to be a lot easier to make 146 pounds in your early 20s than it will be in your early 30s. And so the weight cut for Hooker down to featherweight is not the same in 2022 as it was in 2014. It's going to be a lot harder now, and it's impossible to know how Hooker is going to look on Saturday night. What I would say is I think he gives Arnold Allen absolute hell if he can look exactly like he does at featherweight, you know, that he did at lightweight, but that's unlikely. And we know that usually, you know, in a fighter's career, when they are getting a bit older, when they're reaching the tail end of their career, I mean, Hooker's only 32 years old, but he has had a lot of fights, and he has obviously taken a lot of bad losses. He's had a couple knockbacks, right? He's fought 3 guys in the title picture in his last 4 fights, in Makhachev, Chandler and Poirier, and he's been beaten pretty decisively in all of them. So Hooker's had to come to the realization that he's never going to be a champion at lightweight, and he wants to be a world champion, and so now he's been forced to make changes in order to achieve his dreams and his goals of becoming a UFC champion. And what he's done is drop to the featherweight division and hope that he can make a title run at featherweight instead. But we've seen fighters do this in the past. Lots of fighters have done this in the past, and it never usually ends well. So like I say, I'm a trend-based better. The trend is your friend until the end of the trend. Shout out to Eric Crown. And we know usually when fighters start to kind of start jumping about weight classes to rejuvenate their career, it's usually never ends well. So while I can talk about this fight from a stylistic point of view, based on my research, based on watching Hooker's fights at lightweight, you really need to understand that this breakdown might not be that useful to you, because I'm breaking this fight down based on Hooker at lightweight, not Hooker at featherweight, because we can't break the Hooker down at featherweight because we haven't seen him at featherweight in so long. There's no point in going back and watching his fights against Maximo Blanco and Ian Entwistle, because again, they were far too long ago. So before we talk about this fight, from a technical point of view, go through all areas, just know, don't put too much weight on what I'm saying here, because I'm talking about Hooker at lightweight, not at featherweight. But let's get into it. So in terms of how these two guys match up when it comes to grappling, Hooker should have an enormous advantage on the ground. Arnold Allen, his biggest weakness has always been his takedown defense and ground game. And Allen has just never been very good on the ground. We were talking in the Tom Aspinall breakdown about how grappling is often the Achilles heel for British fighters, and Arnold Allen is a great example of this. If you go back and watch his fights against Makwan Amakani and Mads Burnell, even though he won both those fights, you can see him struggling extremely bad on the ground in both of them. Now the problem we've got is that he hasn't really fought very strong grapplers since then. Like, I know Jordan Rinaldi and Nick Lentz are grapplers, but they're not particularly skilled, particularly strong grapplers. Nick Lentz in particular is very small, a lot smaller than Dan Hooker. So while Rinaldi and Lentz have a base in grappling and Dan Hooker has a base in striking, I still feel Dan Hooker's a better MMA grappler than both Lentz and Rinaldi. And so the problem we've got with assessing how these two guys match up on the ground is, based on the footage we've got available, Hooker is a much better MMA grappler than Arnold Allen, but it's been a long time since we've seen, Allen's MMA grappling, and so he could have improved a lot since these fights back in 2017, 2018. But just know, if the fight goes to the ground, could be dicey for Allen. And usually we wouldn't be talking about grappling in a Dan Hooker fight, because historically, throughout the vast majority of Dan Hooker's career, he's chosen to actively keep fights standing and strike. But we have recently seen a potential evolution in Dan Hooker's style, where against Nasrat Haqparast, he came in with a grappling heavy game plan, took Haqparast down and dominated him on the ground. This is extremely important, because it shows that Hooker may be looking to evolve his style of fighting in a way we've seen Glover Teixeira do, right? Glover built a career off coming forward, pressuring his opponents, and, really predominantly fighting with a very heavily boxing-based style of fighting. Till later in his career, that style wasn't working for him as well. Started to get knocked out, started to get dinged, started to get outstruck. And he realised that he had to adapt. And so over the last few years, Glover's really evolved his style into a more grappling-based style of fighting. I'm not saying Dan Hooker's going to do the same thing, but for the first time ever against Nasrat Haqparast, we saw him coming in with a grappling-heavy game plan, which indicates to me that Hooker has potentially evolved his style of fighting, or maybe looking to fight a little bit smarter and a little bit more strategically, because in the past, Hooker would just come out and look to win a kickboxing match, and it didn't matter what style he had in front of him. He would be dead set on winning a kickboxing match. Now he's probably realised he needs to be a little bit more well-rounded if he wants to reach his goals and aspirations of being a world champion. And that's probably why we saw him use a lot of grappling against Hakaras, because that was his easiest path to victory. Hakaras wasn't going to be an easy fight for him if he stayed standing. So that indicates a definite shift in Hooker's approach to fighting. And that's notable because, like I say, Allen's takedown offense is bad. He's not good on the ground. If Hooker comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, could put Allen in a lot of trouble. On top of that, you know, Hooker's got a big size advantage over Allen. That should also help him, you know, hold Allen down, control him on the ground. So we don't know what Allen's ground game is like. We haven't seen it in a long time, but based on past performances, it ain't good. So we talk about striking now. I would also give Dan Hooker quite a big advantage when it comes to striking. He uses length very well. He's got vicious leg kicks. He's got a nasty jab that he can do a lot of damage from. He's good defensively. He's good elusive. He's a good counter striker. You know, if you come forward and you're not careful, he's got nasty elbows, nasty knees down the middle. He's got fight-ending power in his counters. And he should have a big power advantage over Arnold Allen. He's bigger, he's stronger. He's got big knockout power in every strike, whereas Allen more of a volume striker, likes to chip away at you. I think it could be very difficult for Allen to get respect in there. There's going to be a big difference in physicality, the size, the reach of Hooker, the more diverse range of attacks, the more diverse range of strikes really favours Hooker in this fight. I think he's the more complete striker, the more dangerous striker, and likely to inflict more damage here. But everything I've just said in terms of how these guys match up when it comes to grappling and striking, again, has to have an asterisk next to it because we don't know how Hooker is going to look at featherweight. I'm basing my opinions based on what I've seen from Hooker at lightweight and what I've seen from Allen at featherweight. Hooker might not be the same guy at featherweight because we know when guys go through brutal weight cuts and they're abnormally big for the division, which Hooker will be, he will be abnormally big for featherweight, he'll be huge for featherweight. We know when guys are way too big for the division, they're usually very slow, very clunky, and not as durable and a lot easier to hit because they're much slower than the smaller guys that they're facing. So, you know, based on past performances, it's a terrible fight for Arnold Allen, but I wouldn't be surprised if Hooker looks awful at featherweight. So I won't be betting this fight. Again, if you do want to bet this fight, I would go dog or pass. I would go Hooker. But having said that, home advantage is going to be huge in a matchup like this. Arnold Allen has experience fighting on big events in the UK in the past. He's fought in the O2 Arena in London in the past. I've watched Arnold Allen fight in the O2 Arena when I went to watch the Bisping versus Anderson Silva card. And Allen really rises to the occasion. He feeds off the energy of the crowd, and I'm sure that we're going to see the best version of Arnold Allen ever this weekend. And remember what I said at the beginning of the video, you know, you really need to go and watch that section of this video if you've skipped through it. You know, it's going to be very difficult to beat British fighters on the weekend. You know, hometown advantage is going to have a big influence on the judges for lots of reasons we've already discussed earlier in the video. Dan Hooker is going to either need to finish Arnold Allen, which won't be very easy because he's never been finished before, or he's going to have to win rounds decisively, which again is not going to be easy with the crowd really getting behind Allen this weekend and the judges likely being influenced by that. So I understand why the odds are in the even money odds range. You know, Hooker has an advantage over Allen everywhere based on past performances, but home advantage and the weight cut, you know, down to 146 pounds definitely muddies the water a little bit, makes this one a lot more difficult to pick a winner in, and it's a complex fight and not a fight that I see a strong position on either side, unfortunately. So now let's take a look at the next fight we're going to be talking about, which is going to be Paddy the Baddy Pimblett against Rodrigo Vargas. Okay, so we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. We can see that Paddy Pimblett is around an average of 1.18, which is minus 556 for an implied probability of 85%. And if we take a look at the odds on Rodrigo Vargas, he is around an average of 5.50, which is plus 450 for an implied probability of 18%. So Paddy Pimblett's 27 years old, 5'10" with a 73-inch reach, and Rodrigo Vargas is 36 years old, 5'8" with a 71.5-inch reach. So you can see there, Paddy is going to have a bit of a size and reach advantage, but Vargas is going to be a lot older. So Vargas is 9 years older than Paddy, and remember, age matters in MMA. The younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 9-year age gap in a fight. That's 7-0. So already the odds are stacked against Vargas with his age here, especially because it's a lighter weight class, the lightweight division. A young man's divisions, lightweight division is dominated by guys who have speed, reflexes, accuracy, athleticism. They tend to be some of the first things to go as you get older. So very, very tactical matchmaking from the UFC this weekend. Paddy is a rising star. Paddy is a potential future cash cow for the UFC. And there's going to be 22,000 British fans in the arena on Saturday night that are going to be wanting to see Paddy do extremely well. So the UFC have given him an opponent who is very beatable. The UFC don't want to put Paddy on a main card fight in the O2 arena against someone that could beat him. The fans in the arena have paid a lot of money for their tickets. These ticket prices pretty expensive this weekend, and so they want to give the people what they want. So very tactical matchmaking from the UFC, and this is a very winnable fight for Paddy Pimblett, which is why he is a big favourite. It's a winnable fight, but it is still a fight that Paddy can get himself into trouble in if he is not careful. So the style of opponent that Paddy is facing this weekend in Rodrigo Vargas is for the most part a pretty harmless one. Vargas doesn't really have much knockout power in his hands. He's more of a volume striker, and he doesn't even throw a particularly high volume. His grappling also isn't very good, not that technical on the ground, easy to take down, and very, very weak off his back. So this is a very winnable fight for Paddy. On the feet, Vargas probably will be more technical than Paddy. Paddy is wild and reckless on the feet. Very bad defensively, just goes into kill mode and tries to, assault his opponents without really considering what might be coming back in his direction. We saw him get dropped a couple times in his UFC debut by Luigi Vendramini, and Pimblett is very... He's not fighting a guy who is particularly dangerous. Vargas is far less dangerous on the feet than Vendramini, and so he won't pose much of a threat to Pimblett on the feet, but with how reckless Pimblett is, it only takes one shot and Paddy could easily get himself knocked out. I know he said he's a Scouser and Scousers don't get knocked out, but biology would unfortunately disagree with him. Is obviously a possibility. So on the feet, Vargas is more technical, but Paddy's a lot more dangerous because he has that kill or be killed style, and he really goes all in to try and take his opponents out. So Paddy's a lot more powerful, but Vargas probably a lot more technical. The danger for Paddy on the feet is that he's so aggressive that there's a real risk in this matchup that he may adrenaline dump and burn himself out. At the beginning of this video, we did a long talk on how home advantage can have an influence on these fights in many different ways, and we used Paddy as an example as a fighter who is going to thrive off the energy of the hometown crowd. We've seen him rise to the occasion and perform well in his hometown at the sold-out Echo Arena in Liverpool. And Paddy is one of these guys that gets energised by the atmosphere of the hometown fans. Paddy's absolutely at his best when he's got, fans in the arena really getting behind him. The problem with that is that it also increases the probability that he'll adrenaline dump. Because if he's really feeding off the energy of the crowd and coming out the gate hard to kill Vargas, and he doesn't get the job done early, he could really adrenaline dump, gas himself out, and then struggle bad into the second and third round. The one way in which this is a dangerous fight for Paddy is that Rodrigo Vargas is a tough Latin American fighter, and we know that many, many talented young fighters over the years have come unstuck the first time they fight a tough Latin American. Look at Anthony Joshua against Andy Ruiz. It is a story that has played out time and time again throughout the history of combat sports. Mexicans are extremely tough, extremely durable. They have great cardio, and it's very difficult to get them out there. If Paddy comes out the gate 1,000 miles an hour in round one trying to kill Vargas, and he doesn't get it done, this fight could get very, very dicey for him. So, it's one of those fights where Paddy has really got to use his brain here and not burn himself out in round one, or this one could get really dicey for him, man. Fortunately, though, for Paddy, the UFC have kind of given him a backup plan a get out of jail card in this matchup, because Paddy is predominantly a grappler, right? Paddy's striking is not the best. Paddy is a far better grappler than he is a striker. And if you go back and watch the majority of Paddy's fights, you'll see a lot more grappling than striking. He is a grappler, right? He is a grappler. And ultimately, Paddy will have a huge advantage over Rodrigo Vargas on the ground. So if any trouble, if any time in this fight Paddy does get into trouble, he should be able to take Vargas down and dominate him on the ground. However, he needs to ensure he's got enough gas in the tank to be able to do that, and he's got to ensure he doesn't burn himself out going for the kill. Hopefully Paddy fights smart, and hopefully Paddy paces himself well, to go over a potential 15 minutes if it goes that long, because Vargas is a tough Mexican that won't be easy to get him out of there. So yeah, on the whole, it's a good fight for Paddy. He's a lot more dangerous on the feet. He's got a huge advantage on the ground if he needs to take it there. Vargas isn't particularly dangerous on the feet, doesn't throw a particularly high volume, so it's a good fight for Paddy. I understand why he's a big favourite. Obviously, I can't bet him at these odds. There's very little upside to betting a guy at a big favourite odds like this. But because Vargas is second best standing up and on the ground, I don't feel like taking a shot on him as a big underdog either. Even though, like I say, if Paddy isn't careful, he does run the risk of adrenaline dumping and finding life difficult in rounds 2 and 3 against a tough Mexican. So I hope you found that breakdown video useful. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next one, where we'll be talking about Gunnar Nelson against Takashi Sato, another fight that features a big favourite. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on Gunnar Nelson, he is around an average of 1.20, which is minus 500 for an implied probability of 83%. If we take a look at the odds on Takashi Sato, he is around an average of 4.75, which is going to be plus 375 for an implied probability of 21%. So Gunnar Nelson is coming off the bench on the back of a very long layoff. We haven't seen him since September 2019 to take on Takashi Sato in the main card of UFC London. So straight away, that's an X factor we'll be focusing on in a minute. But for now, take a look at the ages and the size. So Nelson's 33 years old, 5'11", with a 72-inch reach, and Takashi Sato, 31 years old, 5'10", with a 73-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, and about roughly the same experience as well, which is very interesting. So the only real notable X factor on this one is, like I say, Gunnar Nelson's long layoff, coming into this fight on the back of a very long layoff, and we don't know how he's going to look with that ring rust to shake off. We know ring rust is a very real thing. Will Nelson look better than ever on Saturday night after having so much time to improve since we last saw him, or will he have declined? Very difficult to say. We don't know. It's a big X factor, which makes it quite dangerous to bet on Nelson as a big favourite. But what we can do is talk about how these two guys match up from a stylistic point of view based on their past matchups. And based on their past matchups, this is an absolutely terrible fight for Takashi Sato, because Sato has very bad takedown defense and a very low level ground game. He's incredibly weak off his back. And we know Gunnar Nelson is a great MMA grappler, heavy from top position and extremely dangerous on the ground. So Takashi Sato is predominantly a striker, and to be fair, both guys kind of have a similar style of striking. They like to stand in that sideways karate stance, kind of chip away at their opponents. Takashi Sato is more dangerous on the feet, I would say, but Gunnar Nelson's very elusive, very good defensively, so it won't be easy for Sato to get to Nelson and score points. If Nelson doesn't want to engage, it's going to be very difficult for Sato to get to him and make him engage. So on the feet, this fight, it could be awkward and tricky for Sato. But on the ground, Gunnar Nelson should absolutely dominate, should be able to get this fight to the ground easily and do whatever he wants to Sato on the ground. So this is a very simple, complex fight. There's not really, very, very simple, straightforward fight. There's not a lot else for me to talk about here. Nelson should be able to win this one easily with his grappling, and I haven't seen anything from Sato to suggest he can stop Nelson from taking him down or survive on the ground if Nelson does take him down. Easy fight for Nelson, but that long layoff could make things interesting. We now talk about the next fight on this card, which is going to be Luana Carolina against Molly McCann. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Molly McCann is the favourite at average odds of around 1.71, which is minus 141 for an implied probability of 58%. And if we take a look at the odds on Luana Carolina, she is around an average of 2.20, which is plus 120 for an implied probability of 45%. So Luana Carolina is 28 years old, 5'6" with a 69-inch reach, and Molly McCann, 31 years old, 5'4" with a 62-inch reach. So the first X factor we need to talk about on this one is the size difference, because Luana Carolina is going to have a massive 7-inch reach advantage over Molly McCann. She's going to be a lot bigger and a lot stronger than Molly McCann as well. We've seen a real physicality to Carolina in her last couple of fights against Poliana Botelho and also against Lupita Godinez. Molly McCann is quite small, quite slight, doesn't have a great deal of physicality to anything that she does. And we know physicality has a huge influence on how a lot of women's MMA fights tend to play out, and there's no doubt that Luana Carolina is the more physically imposing female athlete in this matchup, which will give her an edge. But another X factor to take into consideration is something that we spoke about a lot at the beginning of this video, and that's home advantage and what it means in the context of this fight. And we know that Molly McCann, just like her teammate Paddy Pimblett, is a fighter that thrives off the energy of the crowd. We've seen her rise to the occasion and perform extremely well in front of her hometown fans in the sold-out Echo Arena in Liverpool, and she is going to be on fire. She is going to be buzzing. She's going to be a wild ball of energy when she walks out in front of those fans in the O2 Arena on Saturday night. It's going to be a wild atmosphere. The crowd's really going to get behind Molly McCann, and she is going to do her best to deliver. She's going to be very amped up, and she is the kind of fighter that there is no risk of her adrenaline dumping under the pressure and weight of the crowd. It will energize her and definitely bring out the best in Molly McCann. So that aspect of home advantage is going to be huge for Molly this weekend. It's also going to be huge for Molly because it is very likely that this fight is going to be competitive, and anytime Molly has any remote tiny little bit of success in this matchup, the crowd is going to go crazy, which could have a big influence on the judges. It's really not going to be very easy for Carolina to win a decision against Molly McCann on Saturday night. And with, Molly McCann being tough, Carolina not being that dangerous, it's unlikely Carolina's going to get a finish. So if this fight goes the distance, what's the probability that Carolina's going to win a decision? Not very high in London. It's going to be very difficult for the judges not to be influenced by how the crowd reacts anytime Molly McCann has a little bit of success in there on Saturday night. Crowd's going to be bang up for this one, and Molly McCann is going to feed off that energy and also be bang up for it and give Luana Carolina hell. So those are important X factors to take into consideration. Size and physicality of Carolina, but home advantage for Molly McCann. So in terms of how these two ladies match up from a stylistic point of view, let's first of all talk about grappling. It's probably the easiest thing to get out of the way. Both girls share the same weakness in that they're both extremely weak off their back. If you can take them down, get into top position, get on top of them, they're very, very easy to hold down. Now, it's difficult to know how that's going to influence this matchup because Molly is probably in a lot more trouble if she ends up on her back because Carolina is a lot bigger and stronger than her. So Carolina's probably going to do a pretty good job of holding Molly McCann down. Probably a better job of holding McCann down than McCann would do holding Carolina down because McCann's a lot smaller. But it's far more likely that McCann will be able to put Carolina on her back because for all of McCann's weaknesses on the ground, she has an excellent deep double leg takedown. Her offensive wrestling with her deep double leg takedowns are brilliant. You can see that even though she's a low level on the ground, there's one technique you can see she's just drilled it and drilled it and drilled it and perfected it. And it's very difficult to stop because her boxing, her footwork's very good, that she disguises the entry very well. And when she goes to that takedown, she fully commits to it. And this is one aspect of the fight where her size can actually work to her advantage. Because Carolina's long, tall, and lean and skinny, whereas Molly McCann is short, compact, and small. So when she shoots in on her opponents, she can really drive in on the legs and hips of her opponent and upset their balance. If you think about the best way to topple a skyscraper, you attack the base. And it's exactly the same principle with wrestling. With Molly McCann having that lower centre of gravity, Carolina being long and tall, it'll be a lot easier for Molly McCann to get in on the legs and hips of Carolina and take her down. So while McCann's probably in a lot more trouble than Carolina if she finds herself on her back, McCann's probably a lot more likely to put Carolina on her back. So hope you can make sense of that information that I've just given you. In terms of how these two girls match up when it comes to striking, it is a little bit tricky because Carolina's obviously got a huge reach advantage in this fight, and she's very elusive. She is difficult to hit. She's got the energy to circle away from her opponents and chip away at them from a range where they have to cover a lot of distance to get inside and land. Carolina isn't a very good boxer. She likes to just chip away at her opponents with kicks, but she is very strong in the clinch. She does have nasty knees. My problem with Molly McCann throughout her career is that she's got good footwork, good movement. She's a good pressure fighter. She's good at cutting the cage off, but there isn't too much end product from her. She does a good job of pressuring her opponents into an uncomfortable range, but when it comes to letting her hands go, she's quite inaccurate with it. So as a result of that, this one's tricky because I could see Carolina kind of frustrating her with her awkward counter-striking style with her length. 7-inch reach advantage, especially for a fighter like Carolina who knows how to use it. Like, that's no joke. And so this is one of those situations where it's going to be very difficult for Carolina to win a decision because the crowd's going to go, like, even if Carolina, blocks a punch, even if McCann misses a punch, as long as McCann's doing stuff, the crowd's still going to go crazy. So in that respect, it's going to be very difficult for Carolina to win a decision on Saturday night. But at the same time, I wouldn't expect McCann to have tons of success because I do think she's going to find it difficult to get inside Carolina and land. She's likely to do what she did against Ji Young Kim, though, and just bite down on her mouthpiece and go kamikaze and just come inside and try and play Rock'em Sock'em Robots. But, she's usually pretty inaccurate, and Carolina doesn't usually hang about to play that game. She usually gets on her bike and circles away, so it's difficult to say how much success Molly will have with that style. I definitely favour Molly McCann in this fight, though. I think she's very likely to win. It's not going to be easy for McCann to... So it's not going to be easy for Carolina to get a decision win here. And like I say, very unlikely she gets a finish. So it's a pretty good fight for Molly McCann. So let's talk about the final fight in today's video. And if you appreciate this video, please like it. Please hit that like button. Please share it with other people if you think this information is valuable and more people should see it. Please also subscribe if you haven't already, as we talk about the final fight in this video, which is going to be Jay Herbert against Ilia Topuria. Another fight featuring a big favourite. Topuria, one of the biggest favourites on the card. Average, actually he is the biggest favourite on the card. Average odds of about 1.18, which is going to be minus 556 for an implied probability of 85%. We take a look at the odds on Jay Herbert. He is around an average of 5.25, which is plus 425 for an implied probability, 19%. My fucking hair's going crazy. All right, need a little drink, man. Been talking a lot. Barely come up for fucking air in the last hour and 20 minutes, but here we go. Almost done. Let's get this last fight done. So, Jay Herbert, 33 years old, 6'1", with a 77-inch reach, and Ilia Topuria is 25 years old, 5'7", with a 69-inch reach. So a couple of X factors for us to talk about there. First one being the age. We can see that Jay Herbert is going to be 34 years old in a couple months' time. So before his career's even got started, Herbert is old as fuck for a lightweight. That means there's almost a 9-year age gap in this fight, and we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 9-year age gap in a fight. That's 7-0. So already the odds are stacked against Jay Herbert here. Herbert is old for a lightweight. We know that the lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes, athleticism. They tend to be some of the first things to go as you start to get older. So as Herbert starts to approach his mid-30s now, even though he hasn't been fighting for that long, I would expect Herbert to start to decline. Even if we don't see much of a decline in Herbert at the moment, at the very least, I'd expect him to be plateauing. I wouldn't expect to see much improvement from Herbert. Whereas Topuria, at 25 years old, I would expect Topuria to make big improvements from fight to fight and to be improving at a very rapid rate. The other X factor for us to talk about in this one is the size. Topuria 5'7", Herbert 6'1", Topuria 69-inch reach, and Herbert 77-inch reach. So a massive size and reach advantage for Herbert here. I would expect him to have an absolutely comical size advantage over Topuria when we see them at the stare downs at the weigh-ins on Friday. So an 8-inch reach advantage is absolutely massive for Herbert, and that could make this fight very dicey on the feet for Topuria. We know the size matters in MMA, and it may make it very difficult for Topuria to get inside and have success with his striking against Herbert. Herbert is a guy that does hit very hard. He is fast, he is accurate, he is a dangerous striker, and it will definitely be playing with fire if Topuria tries to stand and strike with this guy. On the feet, I'm not saying Herbert has an advantage from a technical point of view, but that size advantage and his power does give him, does pose a significant threat to Topuria. So Topuria will need to get this fight to the ground as soon as possible, because there's a lot of danger for him standing and striking with Herbert. Now on the ground, it's a no contest. Even though the size of Herbert may make it a little bit more difficult for Topuria to get this fight to the ground, ultimately Herbert has bad takedown defense, he's very weak off his back, and he's ultra low level on the ground. Topuria is light years ahead of this guy on the ground, leagues and leagues and leagues and leagues and leagues ahead of him, and should be utter domination on the ground, which is why Topuria is a big favourite here. So this fight's really as easy as that. It's a tough fight for Herbert. Takedown defense is bad. He's got no ground game. Topuria should be able to get this fight to the ground easily and dominate him. But Topuria needs to be careful and not try and come out and make a statement and please the crowd and get a big win with a knockout. Because if he stands and strikes with Herbert with that size difference, I think it could get dicey for him. So that's it for this week's video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're having a great week. I hope you're going to make loads of money this weekend, and I hope this is an enjoyable UFC card for you. Don't forget, check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. You're going to love it there. The best MMA community in the game. Talk to me every day in the VIP chat room. Listen to my opinions on lots of things. Ask me questions about upcoming fights. Ask me questions about anything you want. Betting theories, strategies, anything you want. On there, you'll also find breakdown videos for all of the fights taking place this weekend, all the prelim matchups, as well as every other UFC fight that ever takes place. And you'll also find all my bets on there as well, all my pre-fight bets, my over-unders, my prop bets, all that kind of stuff. Pretty much all of them are profitable, and we do good things. We do really, really good things, and I'm sure you're going to like it. So yeah, hit the like button if you want me to keep doing these. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video with the entire universe, the metaverse, the world. Why wouldn't you? And I will see you guys next week for next week's breakdown video. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. I will see you soon.